All right, our next session is on flying taxis. And to conduct that session, we obviously have our co-chair for this symposium, Dr. Shrikant Agrawal. A bit about Shrikant Agrawal as an aerospace technologist, I would like to say he has been in the industry for over 38 years, but currently as head of flight technology at Urban Air Mobility Division called Supernal now. He was previously the director of flight sciences at Northrop Grumman Aeronautics Systems. Prior to that, for many years, he was at Boeing Research and Technology as a technical fellow. And thank you to Boeing for sponsoring this symposium. And we also want to make sure we thank Boeing for their continued support, because I know Boeing has been supporting ASCI for a number of years in the past. Dr. Agrawal was the CEO, Chief Operating Officer and Director of Operations for a joint venture between Boeing and Tata India. Further, Shrikant led high-speed aerodynamic efforts as an IPT leader for NASA Industry High-Speed Research Program. He's got tons and tons of publications and papers in conferences and a patent on supersonic aircraft design. He earned his PhD from University of Michigan and a master's from University of Maryland, and undergrad engineering degree from IIT Kharagpur. In 2004, he was named the Engineer of the Year by Chinese Institute of Engineers, USA. Since 2005, Shrikant has been involved in ASCI at various executive levels, as I said earlier, but to repeat here, he is one of the giants of ASCI Southern California chapters, and he led that chapter, as well as he was the national president from 2011 to 2013. I'm grateful for Shrikant to accept my challenge of organizing this symposium. And they say a baby is born in 9 months. This is really a 9-month effort where this has come true. And so with that, welcome, Shrikant. Take it away.
Thank you, Piyush, for such a nice introduction. Let's get going with our next panel called the Flying Air Taxis. I'm not sure if we have Javon Shin join us yet. Anybody can verify that he's on call, he's with us?
Not
I know
yet.
he's
Not joined yet.
not yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, I know it's early morning, and I wonder if he's having problem logging in to the Zoom account. But okay, we'll go forward. So let me introduce the subject first. So we all have been thinking about flying machines, flying cars, flying objects. That has been in our dreams for a long time. If you follow the Hindu mythology, you read about these chariots flying from one place to other in just about no time. Well, whether those were all imaginary or real, we don't know. Nobody can validate it. But the point is that here we are today, and it seems like now it is very close to becoming a reality. Very, very close. Something that probably we couldn't think about a couple of decades ago. We have several companies, they are essentially launching the service in 2024. So literally 2 to 2.5 within 3 years from now. There are over 200 participants. There are 200 plus companies, organizations working on launching this. Why so many players? This space is crowded, literally crowded. And why is it so crowded? Because the business potential is just enormous. Morgan Stanley predicted that the business for this air taxi is going to grow to $1.5 trillion by 2040. And this is on the very conservative side. If you look at sort of the aggressive side of the prediction, it's 2 to 3 times more than that. So how is that happening now? It's happening because of all these new and emerging technologies that people are working on. New batteries. Battery is the big deal. Of course, all the car companies are going towards electric vehicle, electrification, and now it's happening on the airplane side of it. And when that happens, people are also thinking about, okay, well, what can we do in terms of shuttling people back and forth for short haul, 30 to 40, 50, 60 miles. Autonomous operations, which is also you hear about every day in the automotive side, advanced manufacturing. So this is an exciting opportunity for all the young engineers who are there on the call, all the other folks, the entrepreneurs, people working in general in engineering, not just aerospace, but in general in engineering. So in this panel, you'll learn about how the flying air taxis are expected to revolutionize the urban air transportation from the experts and corporate executives. We have 3 panelists. So unfortunately, we don't see Jaewon Shin yet, but we had planned for 3 panelists. We may have to do with 2. Maybe Jaewon will join while we're going through this panel. So let's bring up the next one. Let me introduce the very first panelist. He is not unknown to a lot of us in ASCI. So that's Dr. Naveed Hussain. Dr. Naveed Hussain has been pretty much involved in ASCI from 2007 or 8. It goes back a long time ago. I still remember those days when we used to have our chapter meetings, and Naveed used to be in those meetings, working with us, next to us, helping us move forward. So Dr. Naveed Hussain is Boeing's Chief Technology Officer and Vice President General Manager of Boeing Research and Technology, Boeing's Advanced Central Research and Development Unit. In his role as CTO, Dr. Hussain accelerates Boeing's innovations and technology by leading the development and implementation of the company's enterprise technology investment strategy. As a trusted research, technology, and technical organization, BR&T, which is Boeing Research and Technology, develops innovative technologies that breaks barriers, enabling the development of future aerospace solutions of existing Boeing products and services. Dr. Hussain is also responsible for collaboration with development partners worldwide to solve the aerospace industry's toughest challenges. This also includes Boeing's subsidiary, Aurora Flight Sciences. And I'm sure he's going to talk about that in his speech, which specializes in creating advanced aircraft through the development of versatile and intuitive autonomous systems. Additionally, Dr. Hussain has oversight of operations at 5 research centers in the US, including Alabama, California, Missouri, South Carolina, and Washington, as well as 7 international research centers in Australia, Brazil, China, Europe, India, Russia, and South Korea. Prior to this assignment, Dr. Hussain was the Vice President of Aeromechanics Technology for Boeing. Previously, he led platform and network systems technology for BR&T, launched the BR&T India Research Center in Bangalore, and that's when I visited him and met him, had visited his house. We had dinner together and all of that. And so he also directed the Boeing Defense, Space, and Security Flight Engineering. He holds 7 patents and joined the company as a Howard Hughes Doctoral Fellow in 1990. Dr. Hussain earned a BS degree from RPI, or Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and an MS degree and PhD from Stanford University, all in mechanical engineering. He also completed an MBA from the Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania. So please welcome Dr. Naveed Hussain. Next, we have Dr. Anita Sengupta. Dr. Anita Sengupta is an aerospace engineer, instrument-rated pilot, rocket scientist, literally a rocket scientist. and veteran of the space program. She has developed technologies that have enabled the exploration of Mars, asteroids, and deep space for 20 years. Her career began with launch vehicles and communication satellites at Boeing. She then worked at NASA for 16 years on various projects, developing the ion propulsion system for the Dawn mission. The supersonic parachute that landed the Curiosity rover on Mars, and I remember I've seen that video that she played for us in the ACI conference way back in 2006. And the Cold Atom Laboratory on Atomic Physics Facility on board the International Space Station. She then led the development of the Hyperloop as Senior Vice President at Virgin Hyperloop, a ground-based transportation system that operates under vacuum and at jet aircraft speeds. Her most recent entrepreneurial venture is as founder, CEO of Hydroplan Limited, which is developing hydrogen fuel cell power plant technology for carbon emission-free aviation, marine, and ground vehicles. Dr. Sengupta is also professor of astronautical engineering at the University of Southern California, where she teaches and conducts research in the areas of human exploration of Mars, Earth re-entry vehicles, and boomless supersonic flight. She received her MS and PhD in aerospace engineering from USC. In her spare time, she is active in emergency service operations as a captain and aircrew in the US Air Force Auxiliary Civil Air Patrol. Besides these, when she has more free time, she is a member of the Caltech Flying Club, is working on her commercial rating, is a sport motorcyclist, scuba diver, mountain biker, professional public speaker, and a science communicator. Wow. It just goes like, how do people accomplish so much in such short amount of time? Please welcome Dr. Anita Sengupta. Do we have Dr. Javon Shin yet?
No, I don't see him
All right.
online.
Okay, no problem. We'll move forward. Then I would ask our panelists, Dr. Naveed Hussain and Dr. Anita Sengupta, to kind of share their opening remarks. So take it away, Naveed.
Thank you, Shrikant. And it's great to see you. You know, we are benefiting a lot from your wonderful legacy at Boeing, you know, and, you know, you serve as a role model for all of us in this industry, you know, so I have very fond memories of our time together, and I hope I'm living up to your expectations, you know, on everything you've taught me, you know, so, but yeah, I know you have very high standards as well. So it's great to be here with ASCI and to talk about exciting new technologies in aerospace, including flying air taxis. And I think Shrikant gave a wonderful introduction to the technology, and also very humbled to have him introduce me as well. If I may, I wanted to start out with a video, and I think it's embedded in the talk, and so I'll let you all take it away.
You don't step into the future, you leap. And when we leap, imaginations become possibilities. Ideas become inventions. Innovations advance all of humankind. The unknown transforms into the familiar. Courage becomes louder than fear. Opportunities fill the air. Because the sky is no longer the limit. The future of tomorrow begins with our leap. And yours. Are you ready to leap into the future?
So that is, aerospace has always inspired generations, and we're all, I certainly am inspired by the wonders of flight, so that video was intended to introduce you all to Whisk, which is a joint venture with Boeing and the Kitty Hawk Company. It began in 2010. We have about 300 employees headquartered in Mountain View with locations in New Zealand as well as in Atlanta. And this company is focused on the urban air mobility market, and it's Boeing's singular investment in unlocking a very exciting future. As Shrikant said so well, we've been dreaming about this for a long time, and the goal of Whisk is to make it a reality. Let me talk a little bit about Cora, which is the full-scale aircraft that you've seen in those videos. If I could go to the next chart, please. So Cora, there are certain attributes to this vehicle. First of all, it's all electric, zero emissions, a rapid recharge vehicle, and the beauty, I think, in its design, and all of us are kind of in this industry because we find beauty in it. The beauty in its design is in its simplicity. And of course, that gets into operational efficiency as well. It's fully autonomous. This is an unpiloted vehicle. And we see that as a differentiator to our strategy, where we want to enter this market with a fully autonomous vehicle. Certainly, as aerospace engineers, we care about things like range and payload, and this is a kind of a vehicle that has multiple passengers, and we see future iterations with even more, with about a 40-mile range. And what underpins everything that goes into this vehicle and the infrastructure around it is safety. We are absolutely focused on the trust of the flying public. And it's no different in any business that we want to venture into. And certainly Whisk is underpinned by that fundamental value at Boeing. And there are certain things that are happening. I mean, this is an incredibly exciting time in aerospace, and for all the students out there who are studying aerospace engineering, but also all the related fields, whether you're software engineering or electrical engineering, this is all part of aerospace. Aerospace is not going to be successful unless it's also seen and it is a software engineering discipline. For example, amongst many, many different others. I think the interdisciplinary nature of it is the most exciting part, but there's a few enablers that are happening. Certainly, artificial intelligence and machine learning. I wouldn't be able to deliver a talk unless I said those words right now in 2022, certainly, so AI, ML, the autonomy of an aircraft like this is enabled by those kinds of technologies that are continuing to evolve at an exponential rate. Electrification, electric propulsion, battery technologies. This is a fully electric aircraft, and the leaps and bounds that have been made and will be made in electric propulsion is an enabler. Additive manufacturing. Certainly, I mentioned the broad field of autonomous systems. These are all things that are changing rapidly in our industry, I would say exponentially. And so I feel like right now, there's never been more change in this industry. But if I think back, there's always been a lot of change in this. Change is the name of the game in aerospace. And so our goal at Boeing is to define and lead that change, certainly not to watch it. And WISC is our way of being really at the forefront of this unlock in the world of urban air mobility. Currently, we're working on a 6th generation of this platform, which will extend the mission almost in every form. So it's a very exciting time. There's challenging paths ahead of us that are paced by our regulator. But I think, again, I think change, the rate of change is exponential. So, we have to be bold, all of us, as members of this industry, and to create that kind of change. So let me go, if I may, to the next chart. And I want to show another quick video on SkyGrid, and I'll introduce that in a second.
Millions of UAVs are taking flight across the globe. These drones are performing real commercial tasks. They're delivering packages, conducting industrial inspections, providing emergency assistance, and will eventually transport people. But navigating low-altitude airspace is complex. Drone operators are expected to monitor weather shifts, maintain separation from other aircraft, avoid buildings and construction cranes, and factor in risks from the ground. It's not feasible to manually plan, execute, and adapt unmanned flights in such a dynamic sky. A smarter approach to airspace management is required. That's where SkyGrid comes in. Our aerial OS uses AI and blockchain to intelligently route drones and mandate airspace compliance. We monitor, predict, and adapt to changes in airspace traffic, environment conditions, and vehicle performance. Our automated workflows make it easy for businesses to maintain a safe drone operation and simplify how aviation authorities manage unmanned flights. Bottom line, SkyGrid is solving the industry's biggest challenges, integrating drones into rapidly changing airspace.
So, an absolutely vital part of unlocking this future is managing the airspace, the unpiloted traffic management of the future. And there's attributes to it. First of all, the numbers start getting dramatic. When we think about air vehicles going from thousands to millions, and the technology that's required to safely integrate those vehicles into the airspace will have a decentralized, by necessity, approach, and decentralization. And that's where things like blockchain and a trusted system of decentralized management comes in. We're seeing decentralization take foot in many parts of our lives, maybe even, money, with things like coin, digital currencies and such, things like that. But the enabling technologies is around decentralized trust. And then, of course, here again, artificial intelligence, machine learning, where humans move from being in the loop to being on top of the loop, on the loop, for mission management at this level. So SkyGrid is a joint venture, another joint venture where we are, Boeing is a part of this, as well as Spark Cognition. It's headquartered in Austin, Texas, and it's reached a number of different milestones, including FAA-approved tools for drone operators. So we see this as an absolutely vital piece of this unlock. This chart just shows a few of the key technologies around certainly the decentralized management, things like dynamic rerouting, AI-based route planning, and things around predictive maintenance and automatic fleet distribution. So that brings me to the end of my introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with Dr. Anita Sengupta. And once again, thank you, Shrikant, for this opportunity. Oh, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naveed. So let's have the presentation from Dr. Anita Sengupta next.
Okay, one
So-
second, I'll get it up and running. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, you're gonna drive it yourself here?
Yes, I'll just
Okay.
share it now. All
No
right, well,
problem.
thank you. Thank you so much. And it's so nice to see everybody. It's been years since I've seen your lovely faces and also people from the prior panel. I used to work with Richard. We were down the office from each other. And I think I've never met David in person, but we did 2 shows together. So it's actually kind of a treat to see everybody in this event. And it's a fantastic event, by the way. So thank you so much for having me be a part of it. So I, per the intro, spent the majority of my career working for the space program, whether it was at Boeing or at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I only left about 4 years ago to go into the green transportation space. I was enjoying some of the comments related to decarbonization and impacts. I'll talk a little bit about that in my remarks. But I basically take space program for inspiration in terms of solving really complicated problems and developing complex systems and basically having to work right the first time. And it's actually now fun in the second part of my career to take that down to earth, as it were, for a terrestrial application, and specifically to try and address climate change. And I did spend 2 years in the Hyperloop space, which is ground-based green transportation. That's more space-like. And then I did spend 2 years in the eVTOL space, and it is a very flooded marketplace. So that's the reason why I chose to have my own entrepreneurial venture to be a portion of that, not the entire idea of that. And ultimately, I am driven now in this part of my career to address climate change with my abilities as a technologist, as a leader, as an entrepreneur. And although aviation only represents a small percentage of total CO2 output, about 2%, as everything else on the ground becomes decarbonized, then all of a sudden aviation becomes a pretty major player in terms of CO2 output. And as everybody knows, on the Boeing front, highly regulated industry. So if you're going to develop new technologies, if you're going to develop new platforms, it's going to take you several years to get them certified so you can actually get them into the marketplace. So it's important to start now to address the growth in CO2 emissions later. And so that's kind of the genesis of why I started my own company. And it also couples to electric aviation. So if we want to be carbon emission free truly for aviation, you have to have an electric energy storage means. And I spent 2 years in the eVTOL space with batteries, and it's pretty limited, right, in terms of range, in terms of payload capacity. And if you are looking at the suite of aviation use cases, from general aviation to air taxis to business aviation to commercial aviation, range and payload are the key to be more enabling. So I saw hitting a wall at about an hour of flight time, or maybe up to 100 miles of range is insufficient for the majority of aviation use cases. That's the reason why I start a company in the hydrogen fuel cell space to support aviation and extend the range of a variety of different electric aircraft. But with electric aviation comes reduction in carbon output, fewer emissions at high altitudes, actually potentially higher reliability because you're eliminating either the piston or turbine driven aircraft, and also has the ability to reduce maintenance costs because you don't have as many moving parts, and it's easier to maintain an electric motor than it is an internal combustion engine. So there's a lot of positives towards why you would like to see electrification on the aviation footprint. And to be honest with you, batteries also do have a pretty bad carbon footprint because they have a lot of rare minerals in them that have to be mined and obtained. And so, that has to be taken into account. And when you think about the evolutionary use case for electric aviation, we already have it now with small drones, which are used for surveillance, for military applications, and also used, for minor cargo deliveries. If you go sort of up in the payload range, length of time that you need to operate, you can look at emergency response, which is something I'm very familiar with now in the Civil Air Patrol. And then, of course, the other one I'm very familiar with is general aviation. These are all smaller platforms with smaller power requirements. But then, of course, that would suggest that going from drones over to emergency response and general aviation is the next evolutionary use case for electric flight. And then, of course, the one that we're talking about today, urban air mobility. And it lends itself beautifully to electrification because it has distributed electric propulsion, which means you have these sort of propulsion pods of a certain maximum power that you can electrify, maybe first with batteries, then, of course, as we'd like to see next, with hydrogen fuel cells, which is what we're working on. So with anything which is going to be green, you also have to have green electricity, which means it has to come from renewables. And so, of course, great progress on that front here in the United States, also in Europe with regards to wind, with regards to solar, getting renewable energy onto the grid. But then how do we convert that into aviation? Well, we can charge our batteries with energy from the grid, or we can have green hydrogen, which is produced via electrolysis. But what really is important is energy density. And when you look at the comparison of energy density between hydrogen, which actually is rocket fuel, and natural gas, it's a lot higher. If you look at the graphic in the middle, you can see how much better hydrogen is from an energy density perspective as compared to lithium-ion batteries all the way over here on the left, which is probably the worst example of how you want to store your energy. And of course, hydrocarbon fuels have great energy density as well. Hydrogen does have a challenge, of course, because it's a very low density gas, which means you have to store it at either really high pressures or you have to store it as a liquid. And so anybody who has a background in launch vehicles knows that, liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen is the best combination for a propellant choice. But for stored energy, you can also have hydrogen fuel cells, which is the graphic on the right here, which is an electrochemical reaction between oxygen from the air and hydrogen, which is a fuel, which can be stored on board your vehicle, whether that's a ground-based vehicle or an aircraft. But ultimately, you can get to these higher energy densities, which will give you more meaningful payload and range capability. So my company, which I actually started during the pandemic in 2020, because the world was shutting down, I figured now's a good opportunity. I'm based in LA to solve this challenge. And so the first thing that we did let's get government funding. So we applied to the Air Force as part of the Agility Prime program to get our hydrogen fuel cell technology funded from an R&D perspective, and we won that proposal. And so we used that to actually create our initial design for our aviation power plant, which is based off of our hydrogen fuel cell technology. We designed it to be modular, meaning it can start at the 200 kilowatt range, which supports a range of small aircraft like you see here, which is our first aircraft, and also can go all the way up to 1 megawatt. So that covers the whole suite of everything from general aviation to rotorcraft to urban air mobility systems, and eventually to larger single engine platforms or even multi-engine turboprop aircraft. So where we're at right now is conducting experimental flights to be followed by certification, to be followed by initial operations, both in the US and in Europe, and ultimately to sell that power plant directly to the end use customer, which could be an aircraft owner, or to an OEM, which could be a UAM aircraft developer, or a Cessna, a Piper, a Cirrus, that type of system. And so, the competitive advantage of going with hydrogen fuel cell technology over batteries is that you no longer have the issue from a ConOps perspective of having to charge the aircraft. You simply refuel the aircraft and you get significantly improved range and payload capability as a result. So in terms of our company, ironically, we have people from Boeing. So our chief engineer is a former Boeing, and we've got several people from NASA, former students of mine. And this is an actually funny aside. I won't spend too much time on it, but there are actually a lot of young people now who want to work in the sustainable space. And so there are some young people who are actually being turned off by sort of the potential for increases in CO2 emissions because of space applications. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm seeing now a shift in young people wanting to work on aviation, electric aviation, sustainable aviation, even more than the space program. So it's a good time for young people to get into this field. In terms of our company, we have a very large reliance on academia because of obviously my connection to USC. We're part of the USC Viterbi Startup Garage. We're partnered with Embry-Riddle, who's developing our business model for us. And we're also partnered with Antelope Valley College, who's helping us with the certification of the power plant and the aircraft. And of course, our first customer is the Air Force because our platform can be used for vertical lift applications for governmental use cases. Our Demonstrator Aircraft, which is basically our go-to-market platform, is a single engine aircraft. With our system on board, it can do 1,000 kilometers with a cruising speed of 210 kilometers per hour. So you can see right away, this solves the traditional customer who would want a small aircraft, whether it was from an air taxi perspective or for a high value cargo perspective or for personal ownership perspective. And because you're not developing a new airframe, it's actually a lot easier to get the modifications to it certified by the regulator. We're based in North Los Angeles in the desert. Whenever you're doing experimental flights, you have to do it in uncontrolled airspace. So we're up at Fox Field. And you can see some of the development work that we have going on. We've largely been in stealth mode by choice because we didn't want to do press. We'll come out of stealth mode shortly. So I can't show you too many engineering details, but certainly that will come in a few months as we go ahead. And it's been a challenge being able to do in-person operations, obviously during the pandemic, but KN95 masks work well in the cockpit. And so to show you the real advantage of hydrogen fuel cell technology over batteries, it's nice to look at specific energy as a function of cruise time. And so you can see batteries obviously will always stay the same. It's a function of you have to add more batteries, but when you have a longer total duration cruise time, you can have much improved specific energy when you shift over to hydrogen fuel cell technology. And this is a comparison of cruise times that you would get from like a Cessna 182, the aircraft platform that we're working with, which is a Piper, versus, Pipistrel, which can give you an hour, fixed wing aircraft, and the Volocopter, which can give you a few minutes. So you really do get a pretty massive advantage. There is a good market opportunity for this as well. So everyone does like to focus, maybe just on the vertical lift aspect of urban air mobility, but urban air mobility can also include fixed wing platforms, which then couples to the general aviation sector, and it also couples to the Department of Defense vertical lift sector, as well as the commercial vertical lift sector. And then the hydrogen economy actually doesn't just, obviously end with aviation. It also couples to marine, it couples to aircraft APUs, and it couples to space applications and the Hyperloop. So the system that we're developing at the power levels that we're developing, we believe can be used across these different sectors going forward. But in the future, obviously, we're starting small with smaller aircraft, but we would like to bump it up to, turboprop aircraft. And jet aircraft is not a good fit for PEM fuel cell technology as it is. It requires a shift in a different electrolyte, but that's something that we're also working on in an R&D perspective. And we do have actually NASA Johnson Space Center on our phase 2 proposal as an interested party because it has applications for the future human exploration of Mars, which ties it back to where I want to go. But ultimately, all these new technologies that Richard French said on the last panel, they're in work. They're going to support decarbonization, comes from the space program, comes back down to Earth, and can solve a lot of challenges here at home, which I think is pretty exciting. So those are my remarks. Thank you.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Thank you, Anita. Just checking to see if Dr. Javon Shin joined us. I guess I don't see him on the screen here. So, all right. I'd like to ask at least one question, then perhaps go to the audience. There are several questions coming from the audience, but I'd like to ask one question, and this is more for safety and noise or quietness. And so I'll ask both of you the same question. So where will these aircraft fly? We have all heard of the death of Kobe Bryant, the basketball legend, in a helicopter crash. Incidents like this highlight safety concerns of flying air taxis, helicopters in general. Can we trust the air taxi operators that their aircraft are safe and also quiet to fly regularly over our homes and schools? I'm sure the operators will have to comply with any noise ordinance issued by the city or local authorities as well. Would you please share your thoughts on this question? Naveed first.
Sure. That's a great question, and this industry has always been paced and underpinned by safety. And this market and opportunity is absolutely no different. And as we think about entering this market, again, paced by regulatory action and partnership, that's top of mind, and I think that when we think about technology, we think about things around simplification electrification, autonomous systems, advanced software. All of these things are around safety and around improvements in safety from current rotorcraft kinds of numbers as well. In terms of noise, again, great question, you know, and it's quite similar, you know, when we think about how this vehicle is configured, the diameter of the rotors, the power and propulsion system itself. It results in a vehicle where at 1,000 feet, the noise footprint on the ground is 35 dB. That is the sound of a library.
Yeah, 35 dB is really great. That is really great, and especially when you're flying only at 1500 AGL. Yeah.
Should I comment?
Very good. Yeah, please, Anita.
Oh, okay. So I think certainly everything that we do from an engineering perspective is to make every mode of transportation safer as we implement these new technologies. I think it's also to look at the larger context of the risk of forms of transportation. Commercial aviation is the safest form of transportation in the world by quite a bit when you compare that to automotive. Now, certainly general aviation is different. You know, helicopter use cases is different, but it's still way, way safer than people's everyday use of their cars. And I actually looked at this when I was an executive at Hyperloop. The most dangerous thing you can do is ride a bicycle in a city. That's like the most unsafe form of transportation. So I think when you think about transportation safety, you have to think about everything. But I think all of the features are being added to the designs of these vehicles to give them the reliability that they require. With regards to how it's operated in the Kobe Bryant example, you know, there is something called, you know, aeronautical decision making, and sometimes pilots do make a mistake. And I know quite a bit about a lot of these different failures because we watch them with my pilot community. And those, sadly, they took off under special VFR conditions. They really should have gone under IFR, but that particular operator didn't have I think an IFR operational certificate or something like that. So, I mean, people do make mistakes in that front, but that also can be more regulated, for example. And with regards to noise, a lot of people in the UAM space have done noise studies. The background noise of cars on the street is way, way louder than one of these aircraft platforms taking off. So if you are concerned about general noise pollution from the environment, then obviously that solving the cars on the street, freeway next to your, you know, a house or something like that, these are much quieter. And the fact that you've eliminated the internal combustion engine and now you just have an electric motor, it's so much quieter than the alternative example.
So just maybe following up a little bit towards on a similar question, safety, but kind of combining that a bit with the traffic congestion. So the eVTOLs, the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, that's what we're talking about. You know, I guess most of the current airplane companies or the car companies, they're working on electric vertical takeoff and landing. Very few are working on conventional or something like that. So, you know, as more and more of these aircraft, flying air taxis, call them, come into picture, more and more of those are flying above our homes and schools. What we're really doing is essentially taking the traffic that we see on the ground today, go up in the air. So essentially go from 2D to 3D. Now, obviously that means we're essentially shifting the ground traffic congestion to air traffic congestion. And that also impacts the safety. Any comment on that from you, Naveed, first?
Well, that's where this field of UTM and the technologies that underpin it and enable it become so vital. We see these two, and that's the crux of SkyGrid, you know, where and our partner, our JV partner in SkyGrid is actually one of the leading AI companies, and that's certainly strategic because we will need to have some automation built into this kind of airspace integration. Just the numbers, as you mentioned, Srikant, and then again, the whole operation and integration is underpinned by safety. So that is absolutely a pacing item, and it's a key part of this unlock.
Very good. Any comment from you, Anita?
I completely agree and second Naveed's comments. And I was flying. I fly like twice a week typically, and I was flying yesterday myself in, and obviously I was in controlled airspace, Class C airport, so I fly out of, and some person had a pilot deviation where they entered El Monte's airspace in front of me when I was on final, and then they got like pilot deviation, call this number after the fact. So adding autonomy, adding technology actually eliminates the safety risk, which is already there for a flight at low altitude. So it's only going to help things. And so I think when you add in, obviously if it's pilotless or something where there's just a person who's acting as a safety operator and not a person flying the aircraft, you can actually make it more safe. And it absolutely would be required for higher densities of traffic in low altitude aerospace. But it's a technology problem, which I think is easier in the air than it is on the ground, and people are already demoing ground-based autonomous cars, right, where you have to worry about people crossing the street, bicycles, animals, people throwing a tennis ball, right? So that's a much harder technology challenge to mitigate than the one in the air.
Very good, thank you. So let's take some questions from the audience. Rhonda, would you read out some of those questions, please?
Yes. So one question that we had gotten was for Dr. Hussain. The next gen aerospace, does it have regulations in place yet?
That is, that is something that is being worked on with great focus from certainly the FAA and regulators all around the globe. Much of the activity thus far has been around the world of experimental aircraft. As we move into a phase where passengers will be, commercially moved, that is something that is going to be critical, and it will not be any kind of there won't be anything less, certainly, than the FAA regulations that exist for aviation today. So this is something where, as I've mentioned, kind of throughout the talk, this entire market and industry will be underpinned, paced, and I'll say regulated by safety. And that's just a huge focus right now as we build these roadmaps, paced and in partnership with the FAA.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other question, Rhonda?
Yes. Another one is for either of them. Will they need hydrogen fuel at landing sites or hydrogen fueling stations? Whoever would like to respond.
Yes, absolutely. That's probably the biggest challenge, is the fact that anytime you're bringing on a new type of energy infrastructure, there has to be uptake, there has to be support of it from governments. The good news, of course, is when you compare electric vehicle charging for cars, it's a much harder problem, right? Because you need one in every street corner. For aviation, you pick a few routes first, you ensure you have the infrastructure on those few route locations, and then you kind of build it out from there. But that would be required. That being said, for smaller aircraft, the way you currently fuel them is with a fuel truck. So the fuel truck comes and fuels your plane. So you can also have a fuel truck which would have hydrogen. So it's not, and you can also, if you're using liquid hydrogen, you can have it stored like at your facility in a liquefied form in a dewar. So it's not something where you couldn't do it, but you couldn't implement it tomorrow everywhere, but you'd have to pick a few routes and build it out from there.
Okay, let's take one more question, Rhonda, from the audience.
Okay, one more. Can both speakers share their view on what kind of ground infrastructure is needed to support landing and takeoff of the air taxis in urban settings? Is the ground infrastructure going to be left for local governments to support, or would private sectors also take part in that?
Naveed first.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's both. I think it's an and. There's actually companies that are forming that are, sometimes they're called vertiports, and other kind of names around ground infrastructure for the UAM market. I'll also mention that there's probably a small regional airport near your home. It's probably pretty, it's not so well utilized. Every now and then you might drive by and see a GA aircraft take off or land. Those are opportunities, for this kind of infrastructure, and for, I think local governments as well to partake. So I think it's both. And, there's even as we think about urban revitalization, different uses of space for things like a mall or parking garages and things like this, we're going to see the market kind of take foot, and these kinds of vertiports will blossom.
Thank you, Naveed. Anything from you, Anita, to share on that?
I agree completely. And I think it's a business opportunity, because if there is a operation going on, then there's a reason for other businesses. So it can actually be a really great economic development opportunity for places within urban centers that currently obviously don't have a vertiport. But as Naveed said, if you're living in the suburban area, there's probably an airport right next to you that they could utilize, and also needs to be revitalized and also can help the local economy of that area. So I think it's a win-win on that front. That being said, there is actually a lot of sort of community negativity around airports, and so that's something that has to be that has something on the public acceptance front. That's something there has to be a lot of education with the local communities, how this is going to help them and not hurt them.
Okay, very good. Well, this brings us pretty close to the end of our symposium, but before that, of course, I want to sincerely thank our esteemed speakers, distinguished speakers, Dr. Naveed Hussain and Dr. Anita Sengupta. Unfortunately, the third panelist was not able to attend for some reason, not sure, but I think you shared a lot of information in a very short amount of time. And thank you. So on behalf of ACI, I want to thank you for participating in this Flying Air Taxis panel, which is part of the overall symposium called Aerospace Symposium for Everyone. Next, we go into the concluding. Thank you again, Naveed and Anita. So